I'm Oscar Heighthouse.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Root.
Good afternoon, I'm Mariah Nuri, and we are representing Unit 5 from Highlands High School, and our teachers are Ms. Megan Boimann-Hennies and Mr. Brian Robinson.
Should I read it? Take it away. For something different? All right, Unit 5, what rights does the Bill of Rights protect? And we're going with question number 2. The jury has been defined as the democratic branch of the judiciary power, more necessary than representatives in the legislature. Do you agree or disagree with the opinion expressed here? Why? I suppose why not? In what ways do the jury clauses of the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments serve to ensure citizen participation in the judicial process? And in what ways, if any, are both the grand jury and petit jury related to the principle of limited government?
Thomas Jefferson opined, were I called upon to decide whether the people had best be omitted in the legislative or judiciary department, I would say it is better to leave them out of the legislative. This panel unanimously agrees with Akil Rita Mar's assertion that the jury is the democratic branch of the judiciary power and is more necessary than the representatives in the legislature.
Anti-federalist John Mercer believed that elected representation was an essential part of the government, but it wasn't enough. Although representatives are chosen by the people, they don't always voice the opinion of every citizen. Juries are more necessary because they provide a way for citizens to directly participate in the governmental process. By including a cross-section of the community, juries represent all citizens, while elected officials often only represent those who voted for them.
In Federalist number 83, Alexander Hamilton affirmed, the strongest argument in favor of the jury is its security against corruption. Because it's easier to influence a single permanent judge rather than a group of randomly selected individuals, juries act as safeguards against venality within the legal justice system.
In his book, For the People, Akil Rita Mar wrote, "The jury is less about the rights of the individual litigants than about the right of the people to control their government. The grand jury and the petit jury limit the government by taking away the government's ability to arbitrarily charge citizens, determine guilt, and impose punishments. By granting the people these powers, the Constitution entrusts citizens to determine what's right and wrong." Alexis de Tocqueville observed, "The institution of the jury places the real direction of society in the hands of the governed."
Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution declares the trial of all crimes shall be by jury, and the 5th Amendment requires an indictment of a grand jury. Because grand jurors, like trial jurors, are randomly selected, every citizen may be granted the opportunity to serve jury duty. Historically, juries have not always been truly representative cross-sections of the community, but through cases including Strouder v. West Virginia, Basson v. Kentucky, and Jebb v. Alabama, the right to serve on a jury for all persons of all races and genders has been protected. Just as petit juries check arbitrary convictions, grand juries prevent erroneous charges from the government.
According to Akil Rita Mar, the framers saw the jury box as a breeding ground for good citizenship. The random selection of jury service provides a unique form for interaction among citizens. The 6th Amendment assures one's right to trial by an impartial jury of individuals from the state and district wherein the crime was committed. Jury selection occurs first by random selection of names and then through a process of voir dire. This narrows down selections to a fair, impartial panel of 12 or fewer jurors as mandated in Williams v. Florida.
The 7th Amendment highlights that no fact tried by a jury shall otherwise be re-examined in a court of the United States. This role of the jury as a fact finder holds citizens accountable for evaluating evidence and determining its validity. Additionally, the use of juries in civil cases upheld in Toll v. United States and Feltner v. Columbia Pictures Television allows for citizens to resolve issues amongst their peers. Jury duty, as contended by Alexis de Tocqueville, teaches men to practice equity. Every man learns to judge his neighbor as he himself would be judged.
Studies from the Jury and Democracy Project showed a link between jury service and further civic participation. Deliberation and democracy within juries forces participants to learn about civil discourse and how democracy functions. A study led by John Gastiel concluded that the deliberative participation in one form of public life can lead to increases in likelihood of civic or political participation in other settings. Specifically, jury service can lead to greater voter turnout.
Because of the direct participation inherent in juries, they are more necessary than representatives. Juries allow citizens to voice their opinions, determine charges and guilt, and check the government's power. Juries not only benefit the citizens on trial, but also the jurors themselves, who gain valuable knowledge of the judicial system and have overall functions of the government. As written in For the People by Akil Rita Mar, the big idea behind the jury is not so much protecting discrete individuals as preserving a democratic culture. Thank you. We're now ready for follow-up questions.
You said that juries, or I guess we'll start off with grand juries, serve to eliminate erroneous charges on a person. Do you know the standard of proof for a grand jury? If not, just tell me because I can go to another question for that. So in Kentucky, at least, the standard of proof is probable cause. So you go to a jury and you present your evidence to the jury for a crime. The prosecutor presents number one, the defense is not there. And the jury has to determine whether probable cause exists for that charge. Probable cause is less than 50%. So in reality, the amount of times the jury will say, we don't find probable cause and decline return no true bill, which is what when they decline a case, is very small. So considering that, is the effect of having a grand jury really going to present or preclude these erroneous charges, or is it just rubber stamping something and sending it on? And if it is just rubber stamping, how do you fix that?
I would say at this point, maybe it's not so much a rubber stamp, but it's that law enforcement has, I guess, improved in its lack of erroneous charges, and it has strayed away from doing such things. But back when the Bill of Rights was passed, that was very common with Britain and within the colonies.
Well, let me shift the gears here then. I've heard the word randomly selected jury several times. You use the word random. So how are the juries selected in Kentucky?
Well, I know, not necessarily in Kentucky, but all around, the process of voir dire is a French term in which they have a list of all people, of a bunch of people in that area where a crime was committed, and they select them and they interview them, ask them questions, and those questions can range anywhere from broad or to their personal lives, and how much they know on the topic, so you can get a very fair, impartial trial, so you don't have some leaning towards one side and some leanings towards others. But this also, with the media now, that also causes problems because the media presents a side or opinion in which people are influenced, which makes it harder to get a fair, impartial jury.
Before everybody else jumps in, your answer was more towards the selection of an individual trial. I just mean in general, before you get to the trial, who's brought in? How is that selection process? Are you all 18? Any of you? Okay. If you were 18, how would you end up being selected to a jury?
My knowledge, it is usually registered driver's licenses or registered voters that they pull the list of names from. There's generally a gap, an age gap, because the roster of eligible voters isn't updated every year, so there will be like a 4-year gap between updates. So a lot of times, younger people are left out of the jury.
Anybody else have an answer? Because she answered registered voters and registered driver's license. You think it's both?
To my knowledge, it varies from state to state, but those are like the two common.
Well, I believe it's registered driver's license in Kentucky now. But it's an interesting answer because years ago, and I was a prosecutor when that changed, so it used to be registered voters. And then it became registered driver's license. Do you think there's any difference?
I think tying back into Unit 6's question with the amount of people voting, I don't know the exact numbers of who is registered to vote, so depending on who has driver's licenses versus who's registered to vote, cause issues.
Anybody got any speculation as to what might be different between those two?
Well, I think because we have, the right to vote, but not necessarily everyone, especially at an age such as like 18. Not every 18-year-old is very knowledgeable, and so they don't all vote. Or some people, not all are registered to vote, but the majority of people do have a registered driver's license, and I think with the jury, they want, you know, everyone to be included who can be on a jury, and so I think that, that's why they do driver's license over voting.
Is it supposed to be a jury of your peers? Do you think one or the other is more aligned with your peers?
Well, I'd say a driver's license is definitely a broader term. You do have a vast majority of people driving in America, and there is not everybody who's voting. We've seen low voter turnout rates, and while some people just don't bother coming because the difficulty is to make time to get there, a lot of people also aren't registered to vote.
I'm gonna take it in a different direction. The Bill of Rights was written in 1791 before we had 24/7 cable news, or social media for that matter. And so, I'd like to ask, any of you to either comment or discuss, how difficult is it to maintain jury impartiality and to uphold the democratic belief behind having the jury in the first place with the overexposed trial system that we have televised today?
Well, it's very difficult. Again, many people see a lot of things. I know the jury does go through the process of voir dire, and they are essentially decided that they are impartial. They have to almost have a complete media blackout, especially if it's a very large case like the Boston Marathon bomber. The defendant actually requested to change the venue because it was such a big deal in Boston. It almost seemed like everybody thought the attack was on them.
So then how do we balance the right to a free press to be able to report on the goings-on versus the rights ensconced within those amendments?
I think the big issue with that is bias within the news. There's a difference between presenting facts without any opinion versus what is common within the news nowadays, which is very opinionated depending on which channel.
One real quick question, or go ahead, I'll ask after you.
I was going to go after the quote about juries creating good citizens, but with the jury selection process, to me it sounds like it makes good citizens better, and then average to not very good citizens, for lack of better terms, just excluded and not have the responsibility of it. So how does that actually create better citizens?
Well, those good citizens you were talking about, they are involved with the not-so-good citizens, one who are less civically educated. And they were meant to, when the juries were created in America, to pass on that civic knowledge, so that these people who weren't educated before now had a new idea. They would now go and participate in the government more. They would vote if they hadn't before, because they had this involvement with more civically educated people.
Do you think that? Go ahead.
One of our founding fathers, James Wilson, actually said that juries are a great cross-section of the community. So, as to Oscar's point, this cross-section would be able to cross-educate each other and really be able to spread the wealth of knowing what's going on.
I think we're just asking.
And I think this is why we include everyone is allowed to be a part of a jury. That's why we do the driver's license. So even those average citizens, like, they want to enhance their involvement in civics, so that's why they are allowed to be on a jury, and hoping that those average citizens will participate in the jury so they become more educated.
Do you think people who participate in juries actually do what the founding fathers think they were supposed to do and go out and spread their knowledge? Do you really think that happens?
I believe earlier in the history it definitely did. There was some clear signs. But now there is a sort of attitude towards the jury, a sort of regret of being chosen, a sort of not caring that they have towards it. And I think it's definitely detrimental to the ideas that were laid out for it.
So I'm going to revert back and ask again. With that in mind, how does it make citizens better, especially if they don't care?
Well, I think the main civic education coming from it is more of the deliberation and the democratic process of it, which helps to explain how Congress members deliberate within Congress and whatnot. And I think we are not the most qualified panel to ask about whether that is true, since none of us have ever served on a jury, so we cannot truly say what goes on.
Have your parents ever complained about being called to jury duty?
Yes.
In other words, they've expressed regret in the system?
I think it's not so much, it's complaint in, I guess, maybe sitting around, but I think they have come with good stories and good experiences from it, however much they don't like to be there.
When a jury decides, you know, say in a criminal or civil case, hands down a verdict, is there any way that verdict can get overturned?
As in like appeals courts?
No, not with appeals or, we know appeals, but is there any other procedures? I guess it goes to limited government. Is it truly a check on all the other government's branches' power? Or even the judicial power? Can a judge overturn a jury verdict?
I think that it does put a check on the branches, because this way we are actually representing, like, in our government, when we elect representatives.
Can a judge or anyone else overturn? I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to, do you guys know?
I believe in certain circumstances judges can overturn a verdict.
And is there any other way a verdict can be overturned, or pardon powers? Do you guys agree that jury verdicts, and it's your opinion that juries are necessary to the function of our, I guess, society? Is it truly a check on it when you have these other ways of overcoming that?
Well, it's the people's direct check on what juries are.
What do you mean?
Juries are the way that the people can put their voice directly against something that the government has charged them with.
Okay.
That's fine. All right, we can get some feedback. Give you a little round of applause.